All right, welcome to another episode of Principal Liner Notes. This is episode 99, not to be confused with Agent 99 from Get Smart. Anyway, I'm just pleased to have another old friend and bandmate here on the podcast. Last week, great friend of ours, Jeff Howard, was on, and we made reference to our dear and great friend Max Pizarro, who is here with us on the Principal Liner Notes. Some of you, especially if you are perhaps in the tri-state area or the New Jersey area, may see Max as a familiar face and a familiar name. He is the editor of Insider NJ and is one of the eminent experts on New Jersey politics. Also, he is the author of a great book, Bosses Don't Get Kneecapped, which basically again is a great tome on the political machinations of New Jersey politics. All of that aside, I know Max as a friend, a brother, and a bandmate, and just like Jeff, Max and I went to Catholic University in Washington D.C. and we are lifelong friends. And I welcome you, Max, and I'm grateful that you're here, my friend.
Sean, I'm privileged to be here. I'm just delighted, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I just saw the book that you held up, and I wanted to give a plug to Anna Demidova, my friend who painted that cover. And I so appreciate you acknowledging the book.
Pal, I know it's a long time in coming, and you know, we'll talk more about the book and talk more about what you're working on. But I'm real proud. That was one of the great moments of my life and our friendship when this thing landed in my mailbox, because I know that there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and long and winding roads leading to that book. So and in many ways, there are many nods in the book, conceptual nods, and one of the things about Principal Liner Notes is that we always go down all kinds of roads of music, and here we're going to dive in head first. Now, and again, we will try not to be too elusive. I love the anecdote that you said when you were with my daughters years ago, like, basically dad's friends are all weird. So but we're going to dive first of all, the poster behind you, man. I noticed that in our pre-conversation here. Talk Streets of Fire. I mean,
Pal, it's a classic 1980s collision of chaos and mayhem. It's a great movie. If anyone out there hasn't seen it, you really ought to go check it out. The magnificent Diane Lane, an early Willem Dafoe appearance, and the great Michael Paré and Rick Moranis.
That's right. Rick Moranis is in that film, and if I'm not mistaken, 85. When did that film come out?
That sounds about right, pal. Yeah.
The I Can Dream About You. The soundtrack is really what the film is most famous for. I know that will fight for the film. Two-fisted, but
what about the intro of the film? Another Place, Another Time.
Oh yeah,
a rock and roll fable, and yeah, it's just wonderful. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Perhaps we need to dedicate an episode to Streets of Fire, pal. But anyway, you and I, every time we talk music, we talk about the concept album. I've talked about the concept album on this podcast. I've written about it. I make references to it. I would love, and that's really going to be kind of, I mean, we're going to riff all over the place in this podcast, but and also for those of you who are educators tuning in, Max is also a former teacher. He taught in the Bronx at Cardinal Spellman High School. He's an English teacher, and he also taught in North Philly. Both challenging assignments, and I know that your students are better having been experienced in your class. But when we talk concept albums, man, What's your definition? What's your take? Go there.
Well, pal, I have to say most of what I know about the subject comes from you, first of all. And I think I would like to start by just pardon me, just recalling the time when I first became aware of you, if you don't mind. And in that context, address your question directly. But I think it's important. And I think when I think about the concept album, I think about the concept of our conversation all these years ongoing, and how much I've learned over that period of time. But I remember sitting in Dr. Marianne McGrail's lyric poetry class, which was a requirement for all English majors. We had to take lyric poetry. And it was the second day of class, and she had assigned the class Kubla Khan by Samuel Taylor Coleridge.
Right.
And so we went back to day 2 of the class to talk about this extraordinary and zany and wild romantic poem. And we were all sitting there terrified. And
she was an intimidating presence.
Yeah, she was. Harvard educated. Yeah, brilliant woman. Brilliant. The best professor I had at Catholic, Sean. And
I would think so.
Right, yeah. And she said, does anyone want to talk about this poem? And we all just waited. No one answered. So she's looking at the list of people in the class, and she says, Sean Gaylord. And so I hear this baritone voice in the back of the room. Denim into Sir with Love suddenly comes out from behind the upraised desktop. And it's Sean Gaylord sitting in the back of poetry class. And what is he going to say about this extraordinary hallucination that is Coleridge's Kubla Khan? And so you say, in the most conversational tone, relaxed, easygoing, I was listening to Jimi Hendrix last night, and while reading this poem, and I just was struck by the connections. And the moment you said that, I just knew that this is a guy I want to spend some time with. This is a guy I want to be friends with. And I had seen you before because you worked on campus in the mailroom. So I saw you in that setting.
Yeah.
Where you were just doing the John Dos Passos, loading trucks, the working man. But to have a guy actually draw a line from Coleridge to Hendrix, to me, was so exhilarating. And so when you ask about the concept album, and when you asked me to be on the show, I really wanted to talk about Hendrix, at least in part, because that was the first time that you offered an insight that I became aware of. And I think that a concept album really has to truly be distinguished. It has to bring together different forms and then entertain those forms all at once. And when I think about Hendrix, I do think that it's so apropos that you considered him alongside Coleridge, who became one of the godfathers, if not the main guy, through that poem of the Romantic movement.
Mm-hmm.
And for Hendrix, he did three albums that he really produced. Obviously, Electric Ladyland, his last album, he was hyperactively producing with his hands all over every element of it, even picking up the bass and playing the bass. There it is.
There it is, pal.
Absolutely. And so when I think about concept album and Hendrix, in this case, Electric Ladyland, or any of the three, I think about what he brought together, Sean, and I've thought about it for this show. And what I think it really comes down to is he had this extraordinary foundation in the blues.
Mm-hmm.
That was in him. This was not an Evel Knievel lunchbox dude going out and finding an electric guitar and trying to make chords. This was a guy who possessed the lost chord deep within himself. And so he already had that. That was the foundation.
Right on.
Right. Then he's a kid that goes out and here's Bob Dylan. And we know this from letters he wrote while in the army to his father. Dylan made a profound impression on Hendrix because, as you always noted, John Lennon didn't like his own voice. Hendrix hated his own voice.
Right.
And when he heard Dylan, yes, he was captivated by the complexity of the lyrics and the message, and he was totally keyed into that. But critically, he recognized that Dylan didn't have a classic Perry Como, Bing Crosby singing voice, and that if Dylan could do it, he could do it. And so getting back to the concept, it's the blues, and then it's Bob Dylan, folk influenced lyrical brilliance and the anger of the times. And then Sean, it's science fiction.
That's
and
right.
Jimi Hendrix himself called his concept science fiction rock, whether it's Are You Experienced or Axis Bold as Love or Electric Ladyland. The unifying concept, and the reason I wanted to talk about all three albums is because the unifying concept and what makes all three of those not dissimilar from John Dos Passos's USA trilogy is they do formulate a conceptual trilogy. And at the heart of that trilogy is blues, Dylan influence, and science fiction. And when you take poles as bizarre as the blues and science fiction, what you get finally is Jimi Hendrix and really the apotheosis of psychedelia. And pal, there's a great biography out there on Hendrix. I believe the gentleman's name is Cross, but from that, I discovered that this novel is what gave Jimi Hendrix. It's called Night of Light by a fellow named Philip Jose Farmer.
Wow.
And Hendrix was a science fiction freak.
Yes, he was.
When he was a little boy, he insisted that people call him Buster after Buster Crabbe, who was Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers. Right. And so he always had that fascination with science fiction. And he would devour novels. Chaz Chandler, who was his producer from the Animals, he would give Hendrix novel after novel, and he said that Hendrix had more science fiction novels in his apartment than clothes. And when you think about that first major innovative song of Hendrix that came out in March of '67, 2 months before Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, he from this novel found the following line, and that is, above it, the moon shone golden purple in the center and silver purple around the edges. So huge was it, it seemed to be falling, and this apparent down hurtling was strengthened by the slight shifting of hue in the purple haze.
Wow.
And so he got those words from this pop dime store novel that's forgotten today. And that phrase comes up several times in the book. Yeah. He was fascinated by it. And so you start with the first single he released in England, which was Hey Joe. And again, this is, pal, you and I love all versions of that song, whether it's Love or The Birds. I don't think I've ever heard the Leaves version. I don't know if you have, but they all interpret similarly. And what it is it's suburban kids banging on electric guitars and singing very fast. And there's no pathos in it. There's no blues in it.
That's right.
And so the first conceptual offering to this grand trilogy and to the first album is a blues song that is taking Hey Joe back from the teeny bopper crowd to really root it in what it is itself. And when you hear that song, it's not David Crosby, God bless his soul.
And he rest in peace. Yeah.
What a phenomenal talent. But it's not some kid that is listening to a cover song from another band, what it is you feel like you're listening to the guy who actually shot his old lady in that song. You're listening to the guy of experience, the guy with blood in his hands, the guy who is himself the blues. And then you go from that to Purple Haze, which is this science fiction extravaganza that, pal, you were listening to when you were reading Kubla Khan by Coleridge. This is the amazing vision, right? This is the vision. This is Marco Polo taking us to visit Kubla Khan. And
Right.
that's Jimi Hendrix. He's the traveler going beyond this narrow realm that we're occupying, this realm of interpretation of other people. This is the traveler taking the lead. This is the captain sitting in the chair, taking the spaceship beyond our galaxy. And so this is at the heart of the concept. It's the blues and science fiction and everything in between. And everything in between is everything with Jimi Hendrix.
Right. Wow. Pal, that your take on this tremendous period of music, this very finite period of music of Hendrix from, in the course of that trilogy was done in the course of about a year and a half, almost 2 years. And to connect those dots, just quite eloquent. And the thing about this album, Electric Ladyland, which is kind of part 3 of this Hendrixian trilogy, is when I was reading Kubla Khan all those years ago, I was listening to 1983, the song 1983, "A Merman I Should Turn to Be," and which to me is the centerpiece of the album. I know people talk about Voodoo Child, the great hit from here, All Along the Watchtower, Bob Dylan's cover. But the thing about Hendrix and what you said, and the concept album in general, is there was no precedent for what Hendrix was doing, so to speak. I like how you said, I should go back and take note of this. There was the blues, science fiction, and then everything in between. And that everything in between, this creation, this expression, there's no precedent. And Hendrix had the heroics, right? The fortitude, the courage to innovate and to do something that, if you look at all 3 of those albums, there isn't like a pop sellout hit. This is him being this innovator, creating a masterpiece. And so often you and the other kind of the variable in a concept album is, yes, I know I may fall flat on my face. Yes, I know that this is grand and maybe even called pretentious, but I still have the courage, the strength to do something that's never been done before, to do something that's different. Michael Paré, who is starring in that film poster behind you in Eddie and the Cruisers, where he's making this album, Season in Hell, and the corporate, everybody's pushing against him, the band's pushing against him. We've spent a year of our lives making this weird album, Eddie. We should be making hits, like On the Dark Side or 10 Years. And he goes, I want to do something different. I want to do something that's never been done before. And to me, that to me is requisite for a concept album. We and to me as an educator, probably to you as an editor and as a writer, probably why we go back to concept albums is this is that inspiration to do something different, even though we know it may fail or flop, like pretty much every album after In Search of a Lost Chord by Moody Blues. Yes, I made that dig there, but again, to me that's the essence. But I did not know. I'm going to track down Night of Light I did not know that about Purple Haze, man. I just knew that he stayed up all night writing it. Probably was under the influence of some sort of chemical, but we often forget this was a guy. Hendrix was a science fiction geek. He and Arthur C. Clarke's books, all of those things. That was, and this is a beautiful album.
Pal, listen, there's so much there that you just said that fascinates me, and starting with the fact that you were listening to Merman, A Merman I Should Be. Look, I wasn't aware of that song until I was long out of Catholic University, and it just says so much about you that you were totally turned on by that song at that time. And I think that really is the apex of the trilogy. I agree with you. I think that this is Hendrix's own song, All on the Watchtower. His reinterpretation of the Throwaway, which is what Bob Dylan called it, song is great. It's brilliant. But for Jimi Hendrix to write his own song, and really the lyrics in that song reflect everything we're talking about. It's the evolution of the traveler himself. It's man becoming a merman. It's going somewhere. He's in fact telling us what he's doing, which he's turning into something that has never been before. He's turning into this creature that can live and breathe underwater, and in spite of what everyone has said can't be done. And Sean, you said something that I think is really at the heart, the crux of Hendrix finally, and that is the audaciousness, the courage, the just pure raw virtue of courage in this guy. And remember, this is a guy who was already a paratrooper. A lot of these kids are coming to this music. He already had this vast past behind him. He was a guy jumping out of airplanes, and they couldn't get a guitar out of his hand, and they gave him an honorable discharge, recognizing that he's not a bad soldier. It's just that we can't get him to put the guitar down.
Right.
Yeah. And so you talk about courage a lot, and you talk about vision a lot in when you consider these artists, and when you talk about concept album. And first of all, the audaciousness of Hendrix to take on that establishment. Remember, he was with the Isley brothers, sitting on a couch watching the Beatles on television. And what was it, 1964, when they first made their big statement, right? And they're all sitting there, and the TV goes off, and they say, this has changed everything we're doing. Like, are we even going to be in business after this? And one of the other guys sitting there said they have two guitarists. And one of the other guys said, yeah, but we've got Jimi. We've got Jimi. And so he didn't shirk from this challenge. He saw those guys. And Sean, you talk about this short period. It was just 3 years later in 1967 where Jimi Hendrix, the day after Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band gets released, he goes on stage in England, in London, England, in front of the Beatles themselves, Eric Clapton, rock royalty, and plays Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band to those guys. So you talk about the kind of courageous ethos of someone like that, to be able to do that. A guy who rips off, according to Mama Cass, I think it was at the Monterey Pop Festival, I'm not sure, but in any event, or maybe it was Woodstock, I can't remember, but Pete Townsend would smash his guitar to pieces. And Hendrix did that. And then some of the people that were Townsend fans were offended because they felt that he was stealing from Townsend. And then, of course, he lit the guitar on fire, right? So it's not just that he destroys the guitar, but now he makes a bonfire out of the guitar. And the one last one that I think about when it comes to courage, Sean, he goes over to London, England. He buys the most gaudy, garish, Duke of Wellington style, Lord Nelson coat, right? With the gold buttons, the double breasted, and is walking around London. And old pensioners are really offended by this. Who's this weirdo walking around with this coat? And they would go up to him and say, look, mate, you've got to take that off. You're
Yeah.
offending us. We served in the British military. What are you doing? And Hendrix came back with, look, I was in the Airborne. I was in the American Airborne. And these guys were people who remembered I think it was the 51st Airborne or some courageous
Yeah.
iteration. And they remembered that group from World War II. And they said, oh, we're sorry. So this is the kind of attitude the guy had, just constantly challenging convention. And as you point out, there's not a single song on those records that fits into any category. He was embarrassed by Think I'll Have to Wait Till Tomorrow because he thought it was a little too commercial for his taste.
I love that song.
Me too, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's wild. So along that marrow, another great concept album, and a contemporary and friend of Jimmy's is, and it's also, this album is also considered to be Robert Plant's all-time favorite album from Led Zeppelin. In fact, I think Robert Plant said that he would play this album and he would cry, he would weep. And that is Love's Forever Changes, pal. 1968, Arthur Lee, Brian McLean, John Eccles, another great bold album. And I believe Arthur Lee was all but 26 when he recorded this just beautiful album. A band out of LA, Love. It's a band, Max, that you and I are tremendous fans of, and I know that you are a tremendous fan of this album and the entire Love story. What's your conceptual take on this?
First of all, pal, thank you for introducing me to Love, because I had never heard of Love until you shared that great band with me, and the brilliance of Arthur Lee and the guitar playing of the great Johnny Eccles,
Right.
and they were friends with Hendrix. And just one last thing I want to touch on with Hendrix is Arthur Lee is said to have perhaps not gotten as far as he should have because he was African American. Like
Yes.
like he was the ruler of Los Angeles, and they should have been much bigger than they were. And I think some of the band members have said that they feel that because they were way ahead of their time, they were a mixed race band, that they couldn't go farther. And so that was also on Jimi Hendrix's shoulders, but there they are.
Yeah.
And so just the last point about Hendrix, Sean, is remember, this was a guy who welcomed the ire of the Black Panthers because he was playing to white audiences. They were furious with Hendrix.
They were.
And simultaneously, the FBI was investigating Hendrix because they didn't know how a Black guitarist could be influencing kids like this. What was he doing? Was he brainwashing them? And so Hendrix, in addition to everything else we talked about, he took on what had dogged Arthur Lee, and that is trying to be beyond race.
Yeah.
Not trying, actually succeeding. He was beyond race. And that is something that for our times, I think we should study. We should study how it is that Jimi Hendrix really was striving not just to be this musical innovator and was himself a musical genius, but he was that person who as an American, really kind of slipped the surly bonds that have bound us as a culture from the beginning. But getting back to Love, pal, you introduced me to Love. You put together those mixed tapes, and I still remember listening to She Comes in Colors and K Vida. Yeah, what great songs and just little psychedelic gems. And that album itself, as I recall, Arthur Lee was bidding farewell to the world.
Thought he was going to die.
Yeah, he felt that, and I think this is another part of this time that fascinates us. Living with the bomb, living with Dr. Strangelove's bomb, living with Vietnam.
Right.
The world was constantly ending, and so this was coming together with whatever sufferings occurred in the individual lives of these artists, and it produced a kind of tension and a kind of urgency. And that's what comes off that album is the urgency.
That's a good take on that, man. Yeah, it's because again, the sense of, I thought, as he said, I thought these were my last words to the planet. What drove me to this album was I read in the oft read and Jim Morrison biography, No One Here Gets Out Alive, and I remember reading that Jim Morrison had this aspiration for the Doors when they first started out to be as big as Love. And I thought, oh, I need to go explore that album. So I remember going to my local Camelot Music in Winston-Salem one summer day and picking up a Best of Love compilation on Rhino Records. And I think the first track was My Little Red Book, which the Bacharach David song, which I remember from what was that? What's New Pussycat?
Right.
And,
Yes.
and then hearing Alone Again, which is off this album, again, just a great album. Another kind of conceptual.
Da Capo was a great album too.
Da Capo was a great album. What a
Yep.
great, yes. Another album that I know that you have great affection for, and perhaps we could make an argument for this to be you turned me on to this album, man. Duke Ellington live at Newport 1956. Pal, go.
Wow, Paul Gonsalves. So this was Ellington. Remember, this is Duke Ellington from the Cotton Club days, 20 or 30 years earlier. So he was long past his prime. The band is sort of in danger of headed toward the senior citizen circuit, and Duke is desperately seeking a second act. And Paul Gonsalves steps up with that blistering, 27 chorus solo on Diminuendo and Crescendo in Blue. Pal, it was a moment for all time. Paul Gonsalves, this kid from Rhode Island, stepping up and becoming the star of that version of the Duke Ellington band. So many greats coming in and out of the doors of Duke Ellington's orchestra. And this was Paul Gonsalves' moment. And it really was the rebirth of Duke Ellington, and created a whole other generation of fans who would go on to kind of create the music of our childhood. The Miles Davises and the Kenny Burrells and these guys and Gil Evans. So
right, Gil Evans.
Yep.
The great arranger, collaborator with Miles Davis, who actually was a big Jimi Hendrix fan. And
like last seen running around in an Arapaho headdress, interpreting Little Wing, with a full orchestra. Man. Yeah. Miles Davis. And again, there's another Hendrix. Miles Davis was aware of Hendrix, went to see him perform, sitting there with the shades on in the front row, mesmerized. But pal, what an amazing album. And again, you're what a culture clash, what a collision. You're talking about Rodrigo, Concierto de Aranjuez, and nice. Jazz. And so taking two completely disparate things, apparently, and just mashing them together. Yep. And listen, pal, arranged and conducted by Gil Evans. And Miles Davis said that Gil was the equal of Duke Ellington, that for his mind and his money, that there were only two arrangers that he felt were on the same level, and they were Duke and Gil. And pal, the album is just mind blowing.
And again, this notion, again, this what I guess maybe we can call it conceptual courage. Miles Davis could have easily rested on his laurels, played at the Blue Note, and played standards and made a whole lot of money. But no, I want to, I'm doing my Miles Davis, I want to take, the Spanish classical music and play with an orchestra and see what happens and evoke this mood of Spain. Just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful album. Sketches of Spain. The title is poetic.
Right.
Sketches of Spain.
Right. Right. And pal, that you touched on it, like the political correctness that keeps our era in bondage. Like, where is the political statement there? Like, he's just going in his own direction. He's finding the correspondences, to use Baudelaire's term. He's looking for those extraordinary, apparently disparate symbols of life and just bringing them together with no political regard, with no apparent commercial design. Yeah.
He doesn't care. Now, pal, another album, and that I know that you have great affection for, and you made reference to earlier, before we started the podcast, A Tramp Shining, Richard Harris.
That's great, pal.
Jimmy Webb.
Beautiful.
The big, of course, the standard off this, Didn't We? And of course the mammoth hit, MacArthur Park.
Flipped aside, a DJ flipped aside, said, "What's on the other side?" It was MacArthur Park.
Right.
The Jimmy Webb masterpiece, the Hawaii 5-0, Coda. Yeah, it's brilliant, pal. It's intimate, it's confessional, it's a poet gone haywire, pal. It's King Arthur hallucinating, Daniel Taylor Coleridge.
Now, another album that I know, and you mentioned Bob Dylan, and I know you're a huge fan of Dylan, but I know this
my
is
favorite Bob Dylan album. Oh yeah,
bringing it all back home.
Pal, listen, one side is acoustic, the other side is electric. I think the first side's electric, right? And then it goes acoustic, and I still just can't get over that. I still can't get over Hey Ma, I'm only bleeding. That's just I think one of my favorite Dylan songs, if not my favorite, pal. I just think that is a lyrically brilliant album. And he took the guitar riff from the Everly Brothers and put it together with this wild, madcapped poetry that he had.
Now, when you taught, did you bring in any music? Did you, when you were an English teacher, did you bring in Dylan, or did you stick to the script?
I would say that here's what I did, pal. They assigned books that sort of fulfilled those politically correct aphorisms of our age. And what I always did was brought in Shakespeare to bounce off of those books. So they had sort of the books that they thought the kids would devour because they were books about the kids. Mm-hmm. And I tried to get the kids to show that, yes, you're this, but you're also Othello. You're also Iago. Nice. God forbid, and Hamlet. Yeah, right. Yeah, and so
don't be like a Iago, kids, but we've all been envious. Yeah, just don't.
Pal, I was trying to mostly inject the paradigms of our Western civilization, as expressed by Shakespeare, much of the time, or most of the time, because I felt that if you get that grounding, then you can basically go anywhere.
Yeah, that's true, and somebody. Who this is a perfect segue, because somebody who is grounded and then went pretty much everywhere is your former neighbor or current neighbor. I don't know where he is in relation to you in New Jersey, but Bruce Springsteen, the Western Stars album, which again is very much a grounded album, and it's a concept album. We can make that argument, but an album that, again, I could have easily pulled out Born to Run. I could have easily pulled out Born in the USA. I could have easily pulled out The River, which is probably safe albums to talk about. All great albums. But this overlooked album that came out, when did this come out? In 2019, pre-pandemic. This is my favorite Bruce Springsteen album. After right with Nebraska, hovering right under that. But pal, Western Stars, your thoughts?
Pal, I love it. I love the orchestration, and I think if there is a concept he was really trying to do, I think I saw him say this somewhere, a Southern California album. He was hearkening back to those guys that we love, the sort of the this was a Laurel Canyon kind of feel, and Bruce again, the Jersey boy, the wharf rat from Asbury Park, washing up on the shores of LA, man, and crawling up to the Phil Spector sound garden, and nibbling around in there. And that's what you have with that album. It's just a beautiful album. I agree with you, pal.
And probably one of the albums, again, perfect segue. I didn't plan. I mean, we're totally improvising and riffing right now, but an album that was probably at the top of Springsteen's turntable when he was recording Western Stars, Notorious Bird Brothers, Laurel Canyon, 1968,
and timely invocation as we look at a horse that David Crosby, who died 2 days ago, always said was meant to be him. And a lot of David Crosby on that album, but of course he was not on it. Just the songs that he wrote and reinterpreted by Hillman and McGuinn. But it's a beautiful album, pal, and a lot of the sessions, like Flight 713, that didn't make it onto the album, are great.
Yeah, so it's a great, probably the most famous song off of this is the Carole King, Jerry Goffin song "Going Back," which I love. And Springsteen covered that song, in the early days. That was one of his favorites. He does a great version of that, I think, during the 1975, one of his 75 tours. Freddie Mercury has also covered this, but
and pal, featured, of course, in Easy Rider, and
wasn't Born to Follow. That's right.
Wasn't Born to Follow. Yeah, that's right. That's what I was thinking of.
Produced by Gary Usher. Brian Wilson, collaborator, co-wrote "In My Room" by the Beach Boys, and then Gary Usher, because they needed a high harmony part on to sing the high harmony parts on the Notorious Bird Brothers, because David Crosby had been fired from the band. Got his friend and collaborator Kurt Betcher. Kurt Betcher and Gary Usher, of course, gave us this gem, the Millennium album, Begin, another bold flop of a concept album. It's now become a cult classic. The album Begin, the only studio album by the Millennium. So Max,
to Claudia on Thursday, pal. I pictured Claudia Cardinelli and Don't Make Waves floundering around with Sharon Tate. It's yeah, pal. The horns on that album, sinister, and menacing, and then the voices are angelic.
Yes,
and so right, and so the dissonance of the album, again, massively produced, choir boy harmonies with kind of like Wagnerian operatic, Stan Kenton run amok tones. It's a great album.
And speaking of Stan Kenton, we have Kenton and Hi-Fi,
Peanut Vendor
concept album, but big band, over the top, Wagnerian, Peanut Vendor, Opus in what is it? Opus
Pastels
in
or
Pastel,
Opus.
Opus in beige. But a great big band album that I
know.
Well,
it's a wall of sound.
Speaking of wall of sound, this is an album, Stan Getz. I know you're a fan. You've introduced me to this album years ago. In fact, when Deb and I visited you in New Jersey, I remember you played Trains, Boats, and Planes, and said it was the greatest song you had heard. And what a great tribute. The great jazz saxophonist Stan Getz plays Bacharach and David, What the World Needs Now. Great concept album. Some concept albums, are these kind of, tributes, and, we're going to cover a songwriter or cover a show. Go there.
Pal, I'll tell you, I'm getting rid of a lot of my records now. I'm not getting rid of them. I'm giving them to my daughter. My daughter loves all these records. And
Nice.
I will tell you that I'm not going to part with my Stan Getz collection, pal. The Bossa Nova albums, I think he did 5 of them. And
Mhm.
then that album is just never going to leave my collection, man. I just can't rave on enough about Stan Getz. Pal, he really only hits, we're talking about all these innovators and all this creative genius. And your point about Getz was that he was always really a sideman. And it's true.
Yeah.
But he only really had one priority for music, and that's it had to be romantic. It's romantic. That was what Getz was going for every single time. And of course,
Yeah.
his own personal life was chaos. So he was finding in music that connection with the beauty of existence, and it comes across in every recording. That's the unifying principle of everything Getz ever touched. It's romantic, beautiful. It's the kind of music you want you want in the background when you're having dinner with your lovely lady, man. That's Stan Getz.
I can dig that, and again, just we'll do a couple of more jazz albums, because we're down in that path. But Les McCann, Eddie Harris, and to me, what this album speaks is collaboration. These two guys who had never played before and do this iconic live album, all one take, all live, without the net. Go there.
Pal, like you almost expect to see Humphrey Bogart on the piano in the background, that the dim black and white mood of the piece. And what strikes me too, I couldn't agree more with you about the collaborative element there. But who was on the trumpet? Was it Benny Briscoe or
Benny Bailey on trumpet.
Benny Bailey? And so these two heavyweights are at the foreground,
Hmm.
and I really think that Benny Bailey with his trumpet solo in compared to what like brings the crowd to its feet. Like he's this unknown guy is able to find his voice, right? So you have these two guys setting the mood, and then Benny Bailey comes in with that trumpet solo. He comes in after Eddie Harris, and I just think that trumpet piece is a man on fire, man.
Really, yeah,
Yeah,
it's a great album, man.
it really is.
I know, you're a big fan of shows and theater, and I know that this particular film and this particular piece, West Side Story, the film soundtrack, I know Spielberg did the remake, but soundtracks are conceptual too, and this tells a story. And the thing about a concept album, sometimes it tells a story. There may be a loose narrative thread, and here we have the at the time the modern retelling of Romeo and Juliet from the pen of Leonard Bernstein, Jerome Robbins, and Stephen Sondheim. What a triumvirate there.
Well, it's a masterpiece. And listen, this is Bernstein reinterpreting Mahler's Fifth Symphony. You listen to Mahler's Fifth Symphony, and it's all there in West Side Story. But pal, fusing it together with jazz that was really at the heart of Bernstein, because Bernstein grew up with jazz. And so when you talk about the people that would come along and intersect with him, like the genius Stravinsky. Stravinsky came to America and heard jazz for the first time. Bernstein actually grew up with it in the home. And so it was organically a part of who he was by the time he wrote this masterpiece. And really it's European classical music coming together with the American street music and the blues, which was in Bernstein. And pal, will just never get away from this. And I do think that the original movie was just the greatest movie ever made. And I regret Spielberg's interference. I understand what he was trying to do, but the cast of characters that came together for that, to me, you talk about collaboration, pal. That's the ultimate collaboration. Jerome
Agreed.
Kern and Robert Wise. Yeah.
The great Rita Moreno, George Shakiris in the film,
Tucker Smith.
Tucker Smith as
Right.
Ice. I know you have great affection for that. And rounding up, man. I mean, I've got so many albums here that I mean we could talk all day. But I mean, Cannonball Adderley, of course.
Pal, I'm glad you showed that because I really still believe all these years that you are the Cannonball Adderley of Catholic University, pal, because Adderley was the ultimate educator. If you want an education in jazz music, go find a Cannonball Adderley live album. And there he is, actually holding the audience's hand and walking you through what he's doing. What an amazing artist. Just one of the greats, man. And this is a guy who could play in someone else's band as he did with Miles Davis or John Coltrane. And then when he was the leader, I just feel that all those records are just in a class by themselves. I always struggle with the pronunciation of his piano player's name, pal, but that guy, Joe, what's his name?
Joe Zawinul.
Zabinol.
Yeah.
He called that Cannonball Adderley band the best band that ever was. And I think he could make a pretty good case. I just think that is one of the great records, man. I've got that record in my collection too.
Yeah, it's great, man. Let's conclude with an album that is considered a concept album, an album that doesn't get a whole lot of, I think, critical praise. And in some cases, the album is accusatory of how concept albums are indulgent and pretentious and over the top. But I know you have great affection for this album, Days of Future Past, the Moody Blues. I know you're a fan. I think I know where you're gonna go.
Pal, look, I'm sorry, pal. You really you just headed me off at the pass, but yeah, I do think the Mellotron by Mike Pinder really sets the album apart. And of course, Mike Pinder was friends with John Lennon and the Beatles. He introduced the Mellotron to the Beatles in time for them to use it, I think, on Strawberry Fields.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that Pinder was even at the session. If he wasn't contributing hand claps, he was supposed to be playing an instrument. He didn't end up playing. But I do think that the fusion of the Mellotron and the interpretive classical influence there with Justin Hayward's just ethereal vocals made one of the great albums of that time. What was it, 1967? It was the same period of time as these other records, the Sgt. Pepper's and Are You Experienced?
Yeah,
It just offered a whole other, right? Yeah, it just offered a whole other take. And pal, one thing I would say when discussing all these albums, it's very easy to look back in the past. And my daughter, who's a musician, she's a drummer and she's learning guitar, but she said, "Dad, I want to introduce my generation to all this music." And I said, "That's great, and I think you should listen to all this." But I hearkened to Marshall McLuhan, pal, the interpreter of the media, and the reason I first heard about him was Duke Ellington read Marshall McLuhan and was very aware of what McLuhan was offering. And McLuhan said this. He said, "The artist interprets the present. He alone, in his encountering of the present, gives the pattern that is baffling everyone else recognition. Only the artist can give the present pattern recognition." And so if you're going into the arts as a young person, this is what you have to be aware of. Take all that stuff, all of that influence, but finally, it's your obligation to interpret the world of your peers, to interpret the world of the present. And when we talk about all these great artists, whether it was the Moody Blues or Paul Gonsalves and Duke Ellington or Jimi Hendrix and Love, they were all keyed into the present, pal. Look, you listen to Axis Bold as Love, and there's Jimi Hendrix giving a wink to Donovan Leitch. So my yellow in this case is not so mellow. And all these little, again, correspondences.
There it is. Sunshine Superman, Donovan Leitch.
Beautiful. Yep.
Great album, which
great album.
Basically between this album and Jeff Beck, may he also rest in peace rather, Truth, both of these albums form the marrow for Led Zeppelin. And
didn't Jimmy, it was rumored that Jimmy Page played on it, on what was it, Hurdy Gurdy Man? Was that ever confirmed, Sean?
Yeah, and he plays the lead guitar solo on Sunshine Superman. John Paul Jones is also on this album. And then Truth, which is basically the classic Led Zeppelin template of lead singer, guitar, drums, that Rod Stewart singing on this, Jeff Beck being the guitarist, Ronnie Wood playing bass, the great Nicky Hopkins guesting on piano. But there's a song on here called Beck's Bolero, which features Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, Keith Moon on drums, Jimmy Page on bass. It's amazing. But both albums is essential.
Pal, it's time to go back and watch Antonioni's Blow Up for the Jeff Beck cameo. He wanted Pete Townsend in The Who, but they were too expensive, and so they got the Yardbirds in the movie. And Jeff Beck destroys a guitar in there.
That's right.
And so,
pal, there's so much ground that we covered in our discussion this morning, and every time I speak with you, and we've had this ongoing conversation going on 30 plus years, and I'll say this, my first exposure to you was sitting in it may have been anthropology class many years ago, my freshman year at Catholic. You and I hadn't met yet, and I was homesick. It was first semester. Here I am, in the big city of Washington D.C., sitting in this it was large lecture hall, and it may have been the first or second class, and I had plopped down, and I was doodling or writing down imaginary album titles of imaginary bands. I would sometimes do that just to kind of pass the time. And I remember you and a cadre of friends sat down behind me, and directly behind me, and you all started talking about Mission Impossible and Peter Lupus and who was the better cast of the better lineup in the Mission Impossible TV series. And I was so shy and introverted. But it was keeping me from jumping into the conversation. I wanted to jump into the conversation, and I, was homesick, but that conversation gave me a little bit of hope. Like, okay, well, if there are guys back here talking about Mission Impossible and who was the better cast, okay, I'll stick this out. I'm not in a bad place, and so I'm grateful that our roads intersected, and we've had this ongoing conversation where we can talk about John Dos Passos, for the USA Trilogy. We can talk about Goodfellas and Martin Scorsese. We can talk about Cannonball Adderley. We can go down these paths. But I just have great affection and respect and admiration for you, my friend, and I'm grateful that we can be here on the podcast together, and hopefully people have kept this on and stayed through. But your resilience and your inspiration have been great resources for me as a friend, as a writer, and as an educator. And I'm grateful for you, Max.
Well, I just thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for your friendship and your brotherhood. And your friendship has been one of the joys of my life, and watching you develop and being able to share in your creative power, or to be inspired by your creative power really has been just a blessing. And I would just want to make mention of how much admiration I have for your guitar playing, Sean. I just always felt that the way you played guitar in the Sky Dogs or solo um, always carried with it that little hint of Jobim. You were always introducing a kind of bossa nova element into whatever you were interpreting. And I just felt that I'm not surprised that you would invite your old pals, your old washed up cohorts to do a show, because Sean, it was always your generosity. I always felt in awe of your guitar playing, and I don't think you ever treated it with anything other than this is something to share with my friends. And I'll never forget standing at the back of Gwendolyn's, and you were hosting Gwendolyn's that time, and you were at the you were at the table of where they had all the snacks, and we were talking, having a conversation, and then someone said, "And now I'd like to introduce Sean Gaylord, who's going to host the event." And you were just so calm, and you turned around with the guitar over your back, you slung it down, and you walked to the front of the room through the crowd playing guitar. And it was beautiful. It was just beautiful. So I thank you so much, pal, for your friendship. And in the inimitable words of John Dos Passos, shake hands, my friend, with the ruins of a fellow poet.
Pal, arm extended, always, and grateful for your words and your friendship. And I know that folks that are listening in are getting as much inspiration and energy that I've been fortunate to get from you for 30 plus years in this ongoing Socratic dialogue that you and I have. I encourage folks to track down your book, Bosses Don't Get Kneecapped. Pal, do you have anything in the works? I know you cover a lot of New Jersey politics and the civic scene there, but is there another novel? Is there another short story collection? What do you got, man?
Pal, since that book, I've written 5 more novels, and and I've tried to write literary novels and have gotten nowhere fast. And so the latest one was just a kind of 80s action movie, just submitting to all the worst excesses of our youth, trying to re-energize that and reanimate that, hopefully for the present. But pal, I'd be remiss too not to mention the last guy you had on this show, and that is the great Jeff Howard. What a wonderful human being, and yes, a real leader and beautiful person. So the two of you have always, for me, come together, and just so happy to be able to participate in this, the old trilogy reanimated.
Well, thank you, man. Jeff's a great guy, and you guys in that one-off performance of Santiago and Drake, somehow, maybe we'll get you both back on the podcast together, and we can have a virtual Santiago and Drake reunion. With 30 years in the making.
Pal, the Dos Passos trio is what I'm waiting for.
That's right. Dos Passos. Yes, the Dos Passos trio, the legendary power trio that working on concept albums and gigs but again, man, you're incredible. Your musicianship, your bandmateship, your friendship. Folks, be sure if you want to get some insight into Max's work, be sure to check out Insider NJ. Even if you're not a resident of New Jersey, there's just some interesting writing and scholarship and coverage that goes there. And Max and his crack team are always on the ground, whether it's the Turnpike, the Garden State Parkway, whatever off ramp, they're there. I'm really proud of how you're covering the political scene there, which these are very interesting political times that we live in, and I'm grateful that you are at the forefront, holding the Fourth Estate up single handedly. Like Charlton Heston at the end of Beneath the Planet of the Apes. I will gladly be the James Franciscus to your Taylor in that film. But again, grateful for you, Max. Grateful for you, the listener, tuning in to our conversation here on the Principal Liner Notes. This is episode 99. Episode 100 is on the horizon, and I have the great educator and speaker Nikki Spears, who will be part of that celebratory 100th episode. I am Sean Gaylor. This is Max Pizarro. This is the Principal Liner Notes. There is always a flip side to the album, and I will always be there to catch you there, arm extended, looking forward to your conceptual courage and the masterpieces that you are creating. Thanks for tuning in.